I spent 35 years either running towards somewhere new or aching to belong somewhere. And it took me until I was almost 40 to work out that home was never actually a place. I'm Bianca Johnson. I'm an empowerment coach, author, and pregnancy loss advocate. And I turned 49 last week. I wrote a blog post, 7 sevens is 49. For some reason, the 7 sevens have been weighing on me. And that blog post walks through the same 7-year blocks that I used in the introduction to my book. But it gives you what I learned in each of those 7 years. I'm not going to repeat what I covered in the blog in this video. It's about pulling the thread that I realized ran through my whole life, essentially. It was the thread that I only really picked up once I saw it, and I laid all the 7-year blocks side by side. So here's that thread. From the time I was born until I was 7 years old, we lived in 3 cities. I was bilingual at home and heard multiple languages around me as we moved from city to city. Until I was 3, I spoke Afrikaans to my mom and English to my dad. When I started school, I was sent to an Afrikaans preschool with Afrikaans female teachers, and I extrapolated that we spoke Afrikaans to women and English to men. And then when I was 3.5, we moved cities and provinces into an area that was almost exclusively English. And I was having to unlearn this learning because we moved from the university town where languages overlapped and there was so much influence from everyone around us to a city where English was almost exclusively spoken. The looks that my new English preschool teachers gave me when I was speaking Afrikaans to them are something that I have so deep inside me. I don't even know if the memory is exactly true because it was so long ago, but there's this sense of I was very out of place. It was the first time that I recognized the pattern of not quite belonging, having to build the belonging fresh every time we moved physically in the world, every time we moved into a new area. Then came the 7 to 14, where we moved again, and I chose my high school based on what I wanted to do. So I chose art school with a drama focus, not because I was the best on stage. I certainly wasn't when I got there, but because there was just so much value that I found in that community. And so I found my place working backstage, organizing, managing, making the coffee. It was when I discovered that I am particularly talented at making tea and coffee and remembering how everybody wants theirs. And so art school was somewhere where I felt like I was choosing the people around me so that I had a place of belonging. It wasn't about the drama training. It was choosing a place that was uniquely mine. Then I spent 7 years trying to find that same feeling everywhere else in the world, and it didn't quite work. 5 continents, the USA, UK, Taiwan, Australia, and back to South Africa and round again. Each place taught me something different. The USA helped me find a belonging in my body. I was not a small person. I've always been very tall, and from university, I've been bigger and take up more space. And the USA gave me a real sense of belonging in my skin, which I had never really felt as solidly. Having done ballet as a child, I was always not quite right in my body. And then in university, putting on the weight. And the USA didn't see my weight. And I could go shopping and I could feel at home in my skin, and that was wonderful. The UK gave me a sense of belonging to a culture. I have ancestry from all over the UK and particularly Scotland. And I discovered the little hotel that I worked in Scotland was the same area that my ancestral Scottish heritage came from. So that was really cool. But also just an understanding of the English culture, which obviously is hugely influential in white South Africa, as well as a lot of the Antipodean and colonial countries. Taiwan gave me a sense of understanding myself and my joy in discovery. I definitely broadened my food exposure in Taiwan and found some absolutely delightful dishes. Australia gave me a sense of belonging to the Southern Hemisphere. There was some element of coming home to people that understood that the seasons were similar, the culture was very outdoorsy. And it was a realization that the kind of tie between the Antipodean countries, that sort of global south part of the British Empire, have a lot of commonality. It was really nice to be back in the Southern Hemisphere and feel that little bit more at home. South Africa, though, definitely is home. And as much as I love exploring and traveling and visiting countries and really experiencing all of that, there was a deep loneliness underneath all of it. Constantly being in spaces where I never quite fit in. I was the South African in a group of Australians, or I was the South African in America, and genuinely got asked if I was getting used to wearing clothes, which was quite shocking to come from a grown adult. But anyway, but that loneliness underneath it all became quite exhausting. And the decision to come home wasn't necessarily mine. But just before I turned 30, I came home to South Africa, and I knew that I wasn't going to be going back to the US. I wasn't at the time sure if it was a holiday or a stopover. I was coming home to see what was next. And turns out staying home was next. There was a real sense of nervousness coming home, leaving America where I'd been for years, and felt very comfortable, to coming home to South Africa where the only thing I'd ever heard was international news about what's going on. And as anyone who has ever traveled knows, that that is truly not what's actually happening at home. Most of the news stories I would ask my parents about, and they would not even know what I was talking about. But there was a certain sense of, once I was here, that I truly was home. And there was a calmness that came with that sense of settling. I bought a flat. I got a wonderful job that I was really enjoying, and I still got to travel, but I got to come home all the time. And that calmness was something I hadn't felt in over a decade. And the genuine sense of fitting in on a cultural perspective is a huge thing which I hadn't considered prior to this. Near the end of this time, I met Brian, but it was really clear that I needed to have been the settled, calmer person for the relationship with him to become what it did. So by 35, I already knew home wasn't a country. And then life asked me to prove it. Brian and I got married the year I turned 35. And I finally realized that for me, my coming home was finding the one and setting up a life with him. What followed in those next 7 years were 7 pregnancies, 5 losses, 2 children. I covered all of the story in the book, so I'm not going to go into it now. But what I realized during that period is that I've survived 100% of my worst days. And inside those worst days were some of the best days too. that feeling of belonging and home being my partner was really incredible for me because it meant that I had someone to hold on to and I had someone to share the experience with. It was an incredibly difficult time for the two of us, but it also was the opportunity for us to build an incredibly strong foundation. And now, sitting here at 49, home isn't a country or a place, and it isn't even a person anymore. It's this. In the last 7 years, we have really been thrown curveball after curveball, and all of this has been after my pregnancy losses. 2020, we had the global pandemic and South African lockdowns. A year later in South Africa, we had massive riots that devastated our particular town and was incredibly scary because a lot of the rioters were running past my driveway and I was really in the thick of it. Just as we'd started to recover from the riots, Durban had one of the largest rains recorded in a 48-hour period. So we ended up with catastrophic flooding that damaged infrastructure throughout the province. And it just felt like all we were doing was getting one thing after another that we were having to be resilient about. And through all of this, I had started experiencing perimenopause symptoms. And the weird thing with perimenopause is it brings up so many of the pregnancy triggers and the trying to conceive triggers. It emotionally was a very complicated and difficult period to live through, especially having come out of what had been quite a traumatic previous 7 years with all the pregnancies and losses. But it was during this time that I discovered journaling, and journaling turned into writing my book. A lot of my healing came from the journaling and the writing and the getting my story out. What's come out of that is truly embracing who I am authentically. So here I am at 49 with a wardrobe almost exclusively pink and purple, with the hair to match. And for the first time, I truly, deeply feel authentically me. So after all these years of looking for somewhere to belong, I'm realizing that belonging was never going to be a place. It became a person for a while. And now it's just being fully, unapologetically myself. If any part of this felt familiar, tell me in the comments. What's that moment you knew you'd finally come home, wherever or whoever that home turned out to be? And if you've been going through your own version of chasing and belonging, hit subscribe. This channel's still small and every single one of you actually matters to me. If you know someone who spent years looking for this place, send them this one. I have so many things still to tick off for the next 7 years. Changing how the medical industry treat lost parents, more travel, raising teenagers. I'd love to take you along with it. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'm Bianca Johnson.